let's go shoot this intro. Oh, hi, Rosie. I don't know. Maybe not today. Let's just skip to class. Well, hello, beloved Confirmands, and welcome to class number 7. Thank you for your continued excellent work with the homework and sermon notes. I've been really happy with the progress you've been making. So thank you for taking that seriously and engaging it strongly at home together with your families. Also coming up, season of Lent is almost upon us. Lent begins a week from today, next Wednesday, Ash Wednesday. And we will have worship that evening, which we invite you to participate in. Instead of having our usual classes like this, we will gather for worship on Wednesdays throughout the Lenten season, almost 2 months. And it begins soon. After Ash Wednesday, we will have Vespers services. Maybe you remember these from years past. And I invite you to engage those seriously. We'll be covering a range of spiritual disciplines, focusing on a different one every week. And we're going to have some short videos from members of the congregation sharing about them and how their spiritual practice affects their lives. So I think it'll be really good. I think it'll be rich, and I hope that it is worth your investment. Also, once we get through all of that for Lent, we hit Holy Week. Palm Sunday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and then, of course, the day of resurrection, Easter Sunday. And I expect you to take part in all those services. If it is warm enough and safe enough, we may have some of those available in the Park and Pray format when the time comes. But if not, we'll continue to, of course, worship at home safely. And now, for today's topic. I want you to think about a time when you had to learn a hard lesson. I want you to grab your journal, whatever you're taking notes in for these classes, and I want you to write something down here. A time when you had to learn a hard lesson. Maybe you had done something wrong or hurt somebody. Maybe someone confronted you with a difficult truth, or maybe your parents had to help direct you in a certain way, or your family had to help you direct you in a certain way. And I want you to spend just a moment and note what that was, when that was, who was part of it, and then we'll move on. But before we get to today's topic, let's zoom out just a bit and get to review. Stories do some things, right? Write these down. Again, it should be automatic by now. Stories communicate, they speak truth, they touch emotions, and they build community. And in our Lutheran tradition, we hear stories, we hear the scripture stories about God and about humanity. We hear them in worship together. And so again, we work on our ability to listen. We build those listening muscles, right? Because it helps us interpret. And when we interpret, we always ask those questions. Do you remember these? What's the good news? And how might we respond? So that first week was the story of creation from the book of Genesis. When we're made to be beautiful, wonderful, amazing, impactful, unforgettable masterpieces. God makes us in love, and we then can love others too. That's how we respond to that good news. And then week 2, the flood. God flooding out all those things in the world that rob us of life. And then God deciding that violence is not the way to solve things. That there are non-violent ways to do what is needed to make the world a better place. And then Abraham and Isaac and their march up the mountain for the sacrifice. And Isaac is unsure about what's happening. And Abraham seems a little unsure too, but then God provides what is needed in that difficult circumstance. Will we also look to God for help when needed? And then week 4, class number 4, deliverance at the Red Sea with Exodus, Moses, the grand deliverance of the people from Egyptian slavery. Much good news in that story. And then class number 5, the prophet Isaiah, chapter 55, and a dream of abundance for the world when people can come and eat and have enough and it doesn't cost anything. A vision that comes when life is particularly hard for God's people. What might we dream of in our hardships too? And then class number 6, our most recent class, was all about the Epiphany. Christ's light drawing all people. Remember that story from the Gospel of the star moving across the sky and the Magi and them showing up and reminding us all that God's love and God's light is for the whole world. And now tonight, class number 7, we delve more into the life of Jesus and Jesus' own prophetic mission in the world. So we talked a little bit in our most recent class about the different parts of the Bible, the different parts of Scripture. The Old Testament, which contains the Hebrew Scriptures, the books of the law, and the books of the prophets, and the books of the other writings, poetry and whatnot. And then there's the New Testament, the Christian Scriptures, often written in Greek. And those tell the story of Jesus and the early church. There's the Gospels, of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But then there are also letters written by the Apostle Paul and other people in Paul's community that wrote under his name. But we're not going to get that far tonight. We are only going to focus on another one of the gospel stories. And this gospel story references one of the Hebrew scripture stories of the prophets of old. And prophets, if you remember, are truth tellers. They reveal God's message for the world, especially when it's a hard message. The prophets are often known for calling God's people forward in life with a sort of tough love, a call to repair what's been broken, to change their behavior, to be more in line with what God desires, what is good for the world, good for humanity. And so, in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, we are going to hear about the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And I've got a link for you. I'm not going to be the one telling the story. We've got another pastor, Pastor Jason Chestnut, who's a great storyteller, and he's published some of his scripture storytellings on YouTube. So I'm going to flash up that link. It should also be in the comments, and it was also emailed to you with this video. So pause now, and we'll listen to Luke chapter 4 together, and then we'll continue. Kind of a wild story, yes? Jesus' own hometown, chasing him out, trying to throw him off a cliff? I want to draw our attention to some of the things Jesus was saying that riled everyone up. Jesus used the words of prophet Isaiah to proclaim that God was doing something in his life, in Jesus' life, just as God had done in Isaiah's life. And there were 5 things that were noted. He's proclaiming good news to the poor, release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And if we break down these things, we see some commonalities, some themes between them. For if God is about proclaiming good news to the poor, perhaps that means God is more interested in the lives of suffering people. And the same with release to the captives, right? If God is interested in releasing people who are in captivity, whether in prison or otherwise held by some force, God is interested in their lives. And then recovery of sight to the blind. Oftentimes, people who were low-sighted had a very much more difficult time in the first century, needing a guide, needing help. They might even be relegated to the margins of society. So if God is interested in their lives, primarily, what does that mean? And also then to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, which was this idea that all debts would be forgiven, that everyone who owed other people money or resources or things, those debts were forgiven. It would be difficult then for some people to accept such realities. Because what about the rich folks? What about those who are already free, or those who can see just fine, those who aren't oppressed at all? What about the people who were counting on those debts to come in so that they can enrich themselves? Seems like this was the tension in Jesus' community in his day. They might not have been interested in the changes God seemed to be bringing. But Jesus is clear. His ministry is all about those people who are stuck in life. His ministry is for people who are in tough spots, bad spots, people who don't have enough to get by, those whom society has perhaps written off and forgotten or locked up or sent away. And so Jesus then mentions 2 prophets, Elijah and Elisha, who lived hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus, but they were great prophets of the people of God. And these 2 prophets, they had recognized that God's healing, that God's work in the world was for people beyond the usual boundaries. It wasn't just for the core inner circle, but God's healing and love was for people who needed it most, which I think is some good news for us. That God's healing and love and deliverance is for those who need it most. And so Jesus then sought to live in the same way as these prophets of old. But as we see, as we have heard, that made some of his community leaders quite angry. So angry that they tried to get rid of him. Eventually, they did succeed. They had him killed. And we often would do the same thing. We may not murder, but when we receive a message that is hard to hear, we oftentimes resist it strongly, and things might even get ugly when we shut those people out of our lives, and we might even do more harm than we meant to. So how do we respond to this story? How might we follow Jesus in this sort of work and this good news that he is proclaiming in his life? What does that mean? That's the question we'll be asking this week. That's the question that I'll be asking you to entertain in the homework with your family as we together figure out how to live in response to this good news that God brings for us. I look forward to worshiping with you in the weeks to come, especially on Wednesday evenings. And I look forward to hearing your insights throughout Lent as to what God is doing in the world and what good news is emerging, especially as we make our way towards the day of resurrection. So, check out the homework. It's coming your way. I'll ask you to review that story of Luke together with your family and answer the questions on the handout per usual. And of course, then pray together at home as we've been doing throughout the year. And so, beloved confirmands, until next time we meet, Christ's peace be with you.